Now it is time for Stat Sports on the home of the Great Danes, WCDB Albany 90.9 FM and WCDBFM.com. Here's your host, Rob Lepelstadt.
And we are back here on Stat Sports. Joining me now on the WCDB hotline is Paul Schwartz. He's covered the New York Giants for the New York Post since 1994. He's a fellow Great Dane, a UAlbany alum, and we've got him on the phone. Paul, how are you this morning?
Robert, how are you? I'm good. I'm back from surviving 8 days and nights in Minneapolis and Bloomington, Minnesota, so anything in New York right now seems balmy in comparison.
That sounds pretty good to me, Paul. So obviously, as you just mentioned, you were in Minnesota all last week covering Super Bowl 52. Of course, the Eagles captured their first ever Super Bowl title, 41-33 victory over the defending champion Patriots. Paul, right off the bat, besides from the frigid temperatures, as you mentioned, just how would you describe your experience covering Super Bowl 52?
Well, I've covered 25 of them in a row, so each one is a little different. Each one is also very similar. So, this one was, one of the few really cold weather Super Bowls because every stadium, every team that builds a new stadium gets a Super Bowl. New York did a few years ago. Minneapolis did. So if you want a Super Bowl in your city, just build a new stadium.
That's right.
And, so there was a challenge. It was very interesting because the whole media headquarters and setup was in the Mall of America. There was very little action in downtown Minneapolis other than the game itself. Both teams were staying in hotels on either side of the Mall of America, which, if your listeners, you think of like, well, how could you have a whole Super Bowl experience in the Crossgates Mall? Well, the Mall of America is obviously much bigger than any normal mall. It's really not a mall. It's kind of a amusement park with stores. So, the media headquarters, the media room, workroom where I worked, the radio row where all the radio stations were actually in the food court of the mall. So, for example, WFAN, the major flagship station in New York, they were set up right outside of the Shake Shack. So
That's pretty funny, Paul.
Yeah, you used to think of being in a mall and being in a food court and having hundreds of radio stations all around. To get to interview the Eagles for 2 days, I just walked across the mall. They gave you walking instructions, like make a left at the Gap, make a right at Victoria's Secret, and you're at the Eagles hotel where you're going to get to speak to them. So that was different. And obviously the game itself was outrageous, and we can talk about that later if you want, but certainly the game was not expected as far as the high scoring and the most yards in a game in NFL history. So that was really, not expected. And, the team that most people thought would not win won. So that was unexpected as well.
Well, I will say this, Paul. I love Crossgates Mall as much as the next guy, but I just don't know how exactly that would work if the Super Bowl was in the Crossgates Mall. But anyway, so obviously you've covered so many different Super Bowls. Does it ever get old, or is it always exciting, fresh every single year with every Super Bowl that you've covered?
Well, it's a good question. No, I mean, you know what? The week is a grind. It starts. I usually fly in on the Sunday beforehand, and you just accumulate story after story after story, and the bigger it gets, the more difficult it is to get anything fresh and new. Although you can get it, if you work hard and hustle and kind of go through the back channels. To stand there by Tom Brady's podium every day is a little bit tedious because there's just so many people. But he does have, there is great access at the Super Bowl. It always hits me every year. Every year I've done it, it hits me in the press box when you stand for the national anthem, and some great performers doing the national anthem. And if it's outdoors, there's a flyover, and if it's indoors, there's a flyover which they show on the screen. And just the pageantry, and then the kickoff, and all the light, the flashes and picture taking. It always hits me that it's certainly a privilege to cover the Super Bowl. It's an event that more people in the world are watching at that point than anything else. And you get to I get to sit there live and watch it and chronicle it and write about it. So yeah, no, it's like I said, it's a grind during the week, but once the game comes and you realize it's so important to so many people, it's definitely a privilege to do it.
So getting Going to the action on the field, of course, the Eagles continue the dominance of the NFC East, joining the Giants, of course, as the only teams to knock off New England in the Brady and Belichick era. Paul, just what do you think this loss does to the legacies of Brady and Belichick, whom so many see as the best quarterback and the best coach of all time?
I don't think it does much. I mean, the only way you can lose a bunch of Super Bowls is to get to a lot of Super Bowls, and they've won 5, they've lost 3. So, if you want to say, well, Vince Lombardi never lost a championship game, so he's the best coach in the league, that's fine. I mean, that's way before your time. It's before my time. But,
that's right.
If you say Chuck Noll is 4-0 in Super Bowls with the Steelers, so he's a better, coach than Belichick, you can make those arguments. But, you say, well, the guy's lost 3 Super Bowls. How can he be the best quarterback ever? But he's also won 5. They get to them all the time. So I don't think it does much to their legacy. I really don't. I mean, certainly, no one can look at that game and say, "Wow, Tom Brady blew that game for the Patriots." They didn't do enough. In the 2 victories the Giants had over the Patriots, the Patriots scored 14 and 17 points. So it was certainly not the offensive explosion that we're used to with Tom Brady and the Patriots. But in this game, they scored 33 points. That's the most points ever scored by a losing team in the Super Bowl. It really should have been 37 points. They missed an easy field goal and an extra point, so you can't, you have to add really 4 more points on to what Tom Brady should have produced. He scored every time he had the ball, a touchdown in the second half until the last series, the second to last series really, where, the crucial strap, sack and strip and fumble. So, I don't think it does much to their legacy. Sure, the more they add, the better the resume looks, but the resumes are still pretty darn good.
Yeah, definitely a non-characteristic game for Gostkowski in the Super Bowl, without a doubt. So I want to move to the quarterback situation in Philadelphia, and I find this very interesting. So, of course, Nick Foles brings you your first Super Bowl title, Super Bowl MVP. He's got 373 passing yards, 3 touchdowns versus New England. But then on the other side, you've got the guy you've coined as the future of your franchise in Carson Wentz. In your mind, is there any type of controversy, any type of battle here? What do the Eagles do at the quarterback position going forward?
Well, I think the short answer is no and no. Carson Wentz is a freak. He looks like a linebacker. He runs like a running back. He throws like a great quarterback. He's the quarterback. Foles was great. Foles was great in the NFC Championship game against the Vikings. Just great. He was great in the Super Bowl. But they tailored their offense around him. I think they're more limited in what they can do, even though they did throw Philly special and threw a pass to the guy. So I'm not saying they're limited, but I think they simplify things when Foles is in there. He's not a running threat that Carson Wentz is, although I think Carson Wentz has to become less of a running threat if he wants his durability and to, stay on the field. So, I think you have to look at it what it is. I don't think you can overreact. Foles was a good quarterback for the Eagles, and he kind of bumped around and was not a good quarterback for the Rams and thought about retirement and came back and was the backup and had a great, closing stretch here, and he will forever. I don't know if he's a drinker. He's a very religious guy, but if he ever wants a drink or a burger in Philly, he'll never have to pay for it for the rest of his life. There's no question about that. But but I do think because can you trade him? Sure. Excuse me. I think if some team comes to the Eagles and says we'll give you a first-round pick for Nick Foles, which they won't, but if they do, or a player or a package, I think you take you take it. And you really, you have great fortune there by capitalizing on that. But let's not forget, Carson Wentz is coming off an injury. He'll probably be slowed in the summer and maybe, early in the season. And as they've seen, the starting quarterback's the most important position, but a backup quarterback is pretty important. We see what happens when a team has one and a team doesn't. Very few teams could have had their quarterback go down and still won the Super Bowl. So, I think Foles is the kind of guy who'll stay. I don't think he'll start complaining about being the backup again. I think he'll stay. He signed for this year, so maybe you just keep him and ride it out that way. And you have a great insurance policy in case Wentz doesn't come back at full strength.
Paul Schwartz of the New York Post with us here on Stat Sports. So let's obviously move to the Giants. You've covered the Giants since 1994 for the Post. A really tough season for Big Blue, obviously 3-13. But finally now they have their new head coach and GM. Pat Shurmur and Dave Gettleman will lead the new regime in New York. Paul, what are the Giants getting with these 2 hires?
Well, they're getting experience, certainly. They certainly, this is not a year the Giants thought they could, push the envelope and maybe gamble a little bit. Gettleman is just coming off a 4-year run as the Panthers general manager. He spent 15 years with the Giants and their personnel. He's worked for the Bills. He's worked for the Broncos. So, he's 66 years old. So, the Giants, a guy, they talked to a bunch of people. They were not in the frame of mind to hire a Louis Riddick, a guy who they interviewed. They wanted stability. They wanted adults. They wanted guys who had a proven track records. They knew Gettleman well. He's respected in the league, so that was sort of an easy hire for them. He was also available because the Panthers had fired him last summer, so he was available right away. The Giants didn't have to wait, so they locked that up pretty quickly. And Pat Shurmur, the three guys they looked at were the two Patriots coordinators, Josh McDaniels and Matt Patricia. They also interviewed Pat Shurmur. They also interviewed Steve Wilks, who's was the Panthers defensive coordinator. They decided they really, if at all possible, wanted to go for someone who had head coaching experience before. Pat Shurmur did 2 years with the Browns. He won 9 games in 2 years with the Browns, which doesn't sound good, but in this day and age, it should get you an extension. Winning, considering they're keeping Hugh Jackson, who won 1 game with the Browns the last 2 years. So I think you have to rate the Browns when you coach for them on a curve because they're the Browns. And they got an offensive guy that now, if they hired Matt Patricia, they would have had to really had a very important hire with the offensive coordinator. Now they don't have to. Pat Shurmur will hire an offensive coordinator, but he's the play caller, so he in effect is his own offensive coordinator. So they got the big thing. Dave Gettleman said when they hired Pat Shurmur, he's an adult, and we need an adult at this time of our history to coach the New York Giants. That's what they got: stable, solid, maybe not the sexy, flashy picks, but guys who've been there, done that, and, I think the Giants know what they're getting in both these guys.
Yeah, so, Paul, also just speaking about the Giants, and people have said a lot about Big Blue, losing that Giants way. The Giants are a team that always handles things first class, You never have the type of controversies and distractions that we really saw with the Giants all season long. Just what has to happen in this Pat Shurmur and Dave Gettleman era for the Giants to get back to that Giants way, so to speak?
Well, they have to get better players, first of all. I mean, the Giants' way is sounds good, and there is some truth to that. But every team seems to have a cycle. Then they say it's the Eagles' way, it's the Patriots' way. The Giants' way used to be about throwing the ball down the field, running the ball okay, and pressuring the quarterback. That's how they won 2 Super Bowls. Fairly recently, since 2007, they got away from that. Their pass rush was not good this year. They were decimated by injuries, and the main thing is the Giants' way is to put together an offensive line that can protect the quarterback, and that was really in shambles this year. That's the major failing of this recent regime. Jerry Reese, Mark Ross, the guy who ran the draft, they just completely got away from they believed in draft picks and guys that they brought in on their offensive line, and it was really wrong thinking. Eric Flowers, Bobby Hart, even Weston Richburg to a certain extent, John Jerry. It just didn't work. It just didn't work, and I think fans feared it would not work at the start of this year. Their fears were realized. Jerry Reese had no backup plan, and their offensive line just was substandard, and it compromised everything. Then you have that, and they have the injuries, and it was pretty much a non-functioning offense for most of the season. The defense, went from okay to bad to really bad, but their offense was bad all year, and, it didn't give them a chance to win. It just didn't give them a chance to win. You can't score 14, 13 points in these games and expect to win them. So, that's the Giants' way. I think that's what I think they're going to get back to. Dave Gettleman's a guy who believes in building from the inside out. So the offensive line will be better. It'll be different. He's already cut Bobby Hart. It'll be different. It'll be better. I'm not saying it's going to be great because that's hard to do, but it will be better. There's no doubt about it.
So, Paul, obviously, as we mentioned, you've covered the Giants since 1994, and this season was such an anomaly for what we're used to from this team. The Eli Manning benching for Geno Smith, the firing of McAdoo and Jerry Reese in the middle of the season. Just being with this team every day, how would you describe this season and covering this team versus any other year during your time with the Post?
Well, it's the worst record I've covered. I've covered I've covered 4-12s. I've covered a 4-12. I've covered last places. Some 5-11, 6-10s, 8-8s, a lot of 9-7, 7-9. So that's kind of the norm. heck, when they won the Super Bowl in 2011, they were 9-7.
That's true.
They were 7-7 after 14 games. So, I mean, that was certainly not, a Super Bowl, bound team in any way, shape, or form at all. But this was bad. I mean, it was, they started out with some really inept offensive performances, and then by about week 4 and 5, that game against the Chargers was incredible when all those guys got hurt. They lost 3 receivers for the season. They lost to a team, it was 0-4 versus 0-4, so they lost that game at home, which was awful. And then all these guys got hurt, including Odell Beckham Jr., who, let's face it, it's just like the Knicks with Porzingis, or, there's certain guys on your team when they go down and they're writhing in pain, holding their knee or their ankle or whatever. It just changes things. It changes the fans. It changes the front office. Changes the media. Just changes the way, things are written about and the way people act and the way people just deal with things. And that Odell Beckham injury was horrific. And, like Victor Cruz injury in Philly the year before, 2 years ago, it was just these certain injuries that you go down and you don't recover from it. Giants never recovered from that, on the field, off the field, mentally, physically. So it was a bad year. It kind of was a waste of a time year because you knew they were going to make major changes as the year went on. And then you had the ridiculousness of Eli Manning's streak, consecutive starting streak ending at 210 games, which was, just a wrong thing to do at the wrong time. And if they handled it differently and they waited and then they started Davis Webb, the rookie quarterback, the last 2 or 3 games, I think it certainly would have been controversial, but I think fans would have realized that we need to take a look at this guy. And I think Eli would have realized, I got to kind of move aside here, even though I don't like to. But, going to Geno Smith for that one game in Oakland was just silly and stupid. And, it's no coincidence that a week later, the head coach and the general manager were fired. It was really handled wrongly. And even John Mara, the owner, takes some blame for that, the way that was handled. So it was inevitable. I mean, before the season ended, the Giants had a new general manager, and that doesn't happen very often. So, it was maybe that kind of year was needed just to kind of clean house and kind of realize we need to start again here, and that's what's happening.
Paul Schwartz of the New York Post with us here on WCDB. Let's shift gears a little bit here. So for any young journalists who might be listening here and looking to get into sports journalism as a reporter, just how would you describe a typical day or a week for someone like yourself, covering such a high-profile team like the Giants on a daily basis? What's your schedule like?
Well, schedule is if you want a 9 to 5, put on a suit, take the Long Island Railroad or Metro North into the city. That's not the job for you because it's a little different every day. Football. Every sport is different, right? Football is different. You play once a week, so it's more of a Monday to Friday job in some ways than certainly baseball or basketball or hockey, where you're working all over the place. There's a lot more games. It's basically, so you have when you have a Sunday to Sunday game, discounting a Monday night or a Thursday night game, you cover a game on Sunday. You go into the team facility on Monday. The Giants train in New Jersey, so wherever you live, you drive into Jersey and locker room, coach, things like that. Or sometimes it's just conference calls. Tuesday, for most teams, is an off day. I remember growing up with my kids. People didn't realize why on Tuesdays I could do drop-offs or take my kids to school or, be at events and, does this guy work? You know what I mean? Why is he around on Tuesdays? Well, Tuesdays was the players are off on Tuesdays. The writers aren't off on Tuesdays, but you do work from home. Wednesdays is typically the start of the week. It's the start of the week. So if the Giants have a big game against the Cowboys on Sunday, Wednesday is really the start with, the coach gives his, introductory, here's the Cowboys, here we're looking for this week, here's the injuries. Players get the game plan on Wednesday, so they start preparing for the week. So Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday are practice days. Saturday's usually a dark day for the media. You don't get access, and Sunday's the game. So it's kind of, if you want to go into sports journalism, the first thing is you're going to work weekends. That's when the games are, right? The games are Sundays, the games are Saturdays. And so if you like your weekends off, do something else.
Appreciate that, Paul. Final thing before we let you go here, we really do appreciate the time. Of course, as we mentioned, you're a fellow Great Dane, UAlbany alum, class of 1981, I believe, if I got that correctly online. But what do you remember most from your time here at UAlbany?
Well, I remember it being cold. I remember not as cold as Minneapolis, but I remember it being cold. I remember
Still cold, Paul.
What's that?
Still cold, Paul.
Still cold, yes. No, I know. Global warming has not quite taken effect in the capital region yet. I get that. Well, I remember events like you're going to have there tonight, Vermont at Albany. It wasn't Vermont, but it was Potsdam and Binghamton and Brockport and the SUNY schools. When I was there, Albany was a Division III school, and I got involved with the WCDB. I got involved with the Albany Student Press, and, I remember... some great professors and things. Great, I still have 3 or 4 or 5 really good friends from way back then from Albany who I met in college. But I really remember covering those events with Dick Sowers and Bob Ford, and trudging from Indian or State Quad across what seemed like a vast cold wasteland to get to the gym or get to the field to cover those games. And it was not on the level it is now, certainly, where you have nationally ranked lacrosse and good football and very good basketball, and events like tonight. Hopefully, it'll be I imagine it'll be a sold out crowd when they play Vermont in Sefcu Arena. I've been there. I've seen those games. I know Greg Gattuso and certainly Will Brown. Bob Ford is still around. Dick Sowers is still around. That's where I got my. That's where I cut my teeth as and people say, well, you didn't go to Notre Dame, you didn't go to Wisconsin, you didn't go to, Michigan, but, I went to Albany, and they were Division III, and I, honed my craft there, covering Division III sports, and probably wouldn't have wanted it any other way, and, got to the New York Post, and I'm covering the Giants, and cover, all kinds of big events, covered World Series, covered, basketball, I covered the Knicks championship games, and NBA Finals. So, I have very fond memories. You can get anywhere you want from anywhere, really. It's a matter of the work you put into it.
Paul Schwartz of the New York Post, UAlbany alum, joining us on the phone, helping us break down Super Bowl 52, everything Big Blue this offseason as we get closer and closer to the NFL Draft. Paul, thanks so much for joining us. And between the Giants and UAlbany football, let's hope we can get a little better mojo coming our way soon on the football side of things. Best of luck with everything. Look forward to talking with you again soon, Paul.
All right, Robert. Thanks. Appreciate it.
Pleasure. All righty, Paul Schwartz of the New York Post. Take a quick break. Come right back. Stat Sports keeps on rolling on the home of the Great Danes, WCDB Albany, 90.9 FM, and WCDBFM.com. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back.